I'm not a theologian or an expert on relationships. I'm just sharing what I'm reading. Someone said it was kind of optimistic to share about God. Not really. So they're like, after telling someone about Mount Fuji on a journey, and they arrive where it is and experience it for themselves, because it's there. Like George MacDonald, a pastor, once said, it's like watching a sunrise. You might see a few sparks before the sun rises, but once the sun has risen, there's no mistaking it. There are over 21 fine-tuning points that makes complex life possible in the universe, and have to stay within a razor-thin, narrow margin, or life would cease to exist. For these conditions to come about by random are 1 in 10 to 123 places. That's like trying to hit a bullseye from the other side of the universe, the size of an atom with an arrow. For the universe to accommodate life, it's a finely calibrated life. If even one of these points goes out of whack, all life as we know it would cease to exist. To get a finely tuned machine such as that, it would be like a tornado going through the junkyard and assembling a precision-made Boeing 747, or even an iPhone for that matter. I feel bad for the people that are waiting for that perfect piece of empirical evidence to believe. Science is now only becoming big enough to see God's hand in empirical data, but they're still lost for eternity in eternal darkness away from God. And for some others out there, just because one doesn't want to believe in God or an afterlife doesn't negate it or mean it doesn't exist. As Shakespeare once wrote, Horatio, there are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamt of in our philosophy. Shakespeare made a great point, as we are just human beings and quite limited, and there are things outside our abilities. We're dust and finite. Just for anyone who doesn't know, the afterlife isn't a sequel, it's a continuation of life, but different. The other is a reincarnation. These are the 4 fundamental forces that work in the universe. Number 1, gravitational force is a constant, large-scale attractive force that holds people and holds planets, stars, and galaxies together. If it were too weak, planets and stars could not form. Too strong, and the stars would burn up too quickly. Number 2, the electromagnetic force constant is a small-scale, attractive, and repulsive force that holds atoms, electrons, and atomic nuclei together. If we're much stronger or weaker, we wouldn't have stable chemical bonds.
So, to keep it in simple words, atoms are the smallest unit of matter and building blocks of everything in the universe, made up of tiny particles surrounded by empty space. When you think of an atom, you probably visualize something like this. On the outer side, you got negatively charged electrons. In the center, you have the nucleus made of neutrons that have no charge, and protons which have a positive charge. With electrons, we can't really know where it is and where it will be going. The only thing we know is that it will be found somewhere in the electron cloud.
The nuclear force constant is a small-scale attractive force that holds nuclei at the center of atoms together, which otherwise would repulse each other because of the electromagnetic force. If it were weaker, the universe would have far fewer stable chemical elements, eliminating several that are essential for life. There are 6 elements necessary for life: hydrogen, carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, phosphorus, and sulfur. Only hydrogen may exist if the nuclear force constant were different. You wouldn't get the other 5, and hydrogen isn't enough to be able to create complex creatures like humans, animals, or even protozoa. Number 4, weak nuclear force constant, which governs radioactive decay. If it were much stronger or weaker, life-essential stars couldn't form, like our sun. The cosmological constant. Number 5, the cosmological constant, which controls the expansion speed of the universe, refers to the balance of the attractive force of gravity with the hypothesized repulsive force of space. These two forces must be nearly perfectly balanced. To get the right balance, the cosmological constant must be fine-tuned to something like 1 part in 10,120. If it were just slightly more positive, the universe would fly apart or pop like a balloon. Slightly negative, and the universe would collapse, like a balloon without enough air in it to keep it round. Cosmological constant. The ratios of the other constants, gravity, strong and weak nuclear forces, electromagnetic forces, must be fine-tuned in relation to each other. If you think of the universe as a large machine, all the dials have to be calibrated or set for the machine to work, for life to be possible. It's like a tent. Each of the tent poles have to hold up the tent correctly, or the tent collapses. If we increase the strength of gravity by just 1 part in 1034, relative to the other dials, relative to the range of force strengths, the universe couldn't have life-sustaining planets. Number 6. The initial distribution of mass energy at the beginning of the universe, or the Big Bang. The explosive force of the Big Bang had to stay in a razor-thin, narrow margin for life to be possible anywhere in the universe. Within 1 part to 10 to the 60th, that's 10 with 60 zeros behind it. If the force had been any weaker, gravity would have made it collapse back on itself, with no time for life to form. If it had been even the slightest bit stronger, atoms and things wouldn't have been able to be formed. The universe would have dissipated into thin air. All we would have gotten are simple, cold molecules. Particles wouldn't have been close enough to each other to form things. If that razor-thin margin doesn't move someone, then other points about the fine-tuning of the universe probably wouldn't move them either. Just not feeling like there's enough empirical evidence isn't always the reason for atheism. There's other reasons people have for atheism. The fact that they're suffering in the world, and they might have been through some horrendous suffering themselves. Someone might have been innocent and suffered, and they can't see why God would allow them to suffer. That there's evil in the world and innocent people suffer because of it. Some people don't want to change their lifestyle and such. All the scientific data in the world wouldn't be enough for them. Another thing to consider is that the points I'm talking about aren't old data. The cosmic constants haven't changed since they were discovered some years ago. Unless they're changing, then they wouldn't be cosmic constants. In addition to initial conditions in the Big Bang, having to stay in razor-thin, narrow margins, there are other well-known features about the universe that have to stay in those narrow margins now, and have to stay there for eternity for life to exist. These exhibit a high degree of fine-tuning. Among them are 7. Ratio of masses for protons and electrons. If it were slightly different, building blocks for life, such as DNA, couldn't be formed. 8. The velocity or speed of light. If it were faster, stars would be too luminous. If it were slower, stars would not be luminous enough, like our sun. If the sun were too bright, it would kill the plants. If it weren't bright enough, photosynthesis couldn't happen in plants.